A Quickie history of early England, partly explaining why a poem like Beowulf, which appears to be about Danes, might actually really be of interest to the English. By the early 700s, England is very solidly a Christian nation. However, there are still invaders coming in from various places, not Germanic tribes fighting among themselves so much, but new Germanic tribes coming in from the outside, particularly Scandinavia. We've got the Vikings invading over many periods and doing a significant amount of damage. The Vikings are Danes. They are people from southern Sweden. They are people from Norway. They are united in that they are all speaking a language called Norse, another Germanic language. They're in fact closely related to those people who invaded England in the 500s. Some of the particular attacks came in the late 700s. We've got the Vikings attacking the monastery of Lindisfarne up in Northumbria, not too far away from where Bede had been. We have a notable learned monk of the time named Alcuin who actually complains to the Bishop of Lindisfarne that this is a judgment of God. Never before has such a terror appeared in Britain. It is a curse upon the sins of the inhabitants of Northumbria. And there will in fact be multiple attacks on monasteries, which are easy pickings, lots of gold, lots of silver, and monks who basically spend all their time writing and not fighting. So the dating of the Beowulf poem is actually somewhat problematic. One of the arguments is it's written around the year 800, and that makes some sense. England was actually enjoying a fashion for things Viking. Alcuin is actually rather annoyed about this because there's a fashion for Viking hairstyles, Viking clothing, which, considering that they have just been attacking, is really in very, very bad taste indeed. It's really not just in England. The French are also interested in seeking out their roots because they also have roots in Germanic tribes, in particular the Franks. Charlemagne at this time is in fact interested in finding his barbarian ancestors, you might say. So it's everybody's kind of, the Vikings are cool. So during the 800s, there's a lot of on and off fighting with the Vikings. At various times, the English come out a little ahead. Sometimes the Danes come out a little ahead. A major invasion takes place at one point. The Great Heathen Army invades. They actually capture the town of York up here in the north. Right where that arrow is pointing is York. And King Alfred the Great fights them off, but partly also makes a treaty with them. They set boundaries. They are interested in settling in some place other than cold Norway and Denmark. So they basically set up an area called the Danelaw, where Danish law will prevail. And a line is drawn on this map. You'll see the red part is the Danelaw, the part in England. The green part is the part that's remaining on the English side. There are also some other deals. The Danish king must convert to Christianity, and as you know, once you convert the king, a lot of the others are going to follow soon thereafter. I mentioned Alfred the Great. If he seemed to be making a deal and settling with the Danes, what was so great about him? Well, he was a particularly great king because he promoted education. He was particularly interested in poetry himself, and he was also determined that free Englishmen learn how to read and write in English. That actually makes you a civilized nation. He learned Latin at the age of 40 precisely so he could translate text from Latin into English and then supervise the making of other translations. A lot of writing got done because suddenly we have more people who know how to write. He really did sort out the issues with the Vikings. They're going to keep invading all the time. The arrangement with the Danelaw kind of stopped the problems in a significant way. And that also he unified the remaining kingdoms in England, in practice, if not technically in the name. And probably the most significant thing he did was he initiated the keeping of a chronicle, historical chronicle, in English of current events. Now we call that the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle. And so we actually have basically a year-by-year account being kept at numerous monasteries throughout England of what happened that year. And this keeps going till I think probably about the 1100s or so. Okay, so they got the early 900s. There are two distinct populations coexisting in the Danelaw area. You got the English who already lived there, and you got the Danes or Norwegians who have moved in. So technically it is Danish law, but the Danish Vikings are marrying local English women who are Christian. They are, as a result, adopting Christianity and abandoning whatever Viking paganism they had before. They were also giving up berserking as their principal occupation and taking up farming. One of the reasons they actually wanted to invade at this time was because they need a little bit more land because of pressures on their own home territories. And of course, eventually you see the replacement of Norse, the language which the Danes would be speaking, with the local language, which is English. You will start seeing at this time some Norwegian words slipping into English. Okay, so where are we by the 930s? Well, actually, King Alfred the Great's grandson manages to retake the Danelaw area and pull it back into England. He's inherited one of the kingdoms in Wales, which has been sort of like out of the picture all of this time. And he's the first one who sort of refers to himself as the King of all England. It isn't really all of England. We're ignoring Scotland, we're ignoring most of Wales, we're ignoring Cornwall, but yeah, it's more than anyone's done before. So there are critics who will argue that Beowulf is written actually around this time, around the year 900, perhaps even as late as the thousands. But what's the case for being written around the year 900? Well, we do know that the original dialect for this poem was Mercian. Mercian is right in the border. Half of the territory got absorbed into the Danelaw. Half of it is on the border of it. As a result, the subject matter might be appealing to the Danes. Who knows? Maybe some of the stories came from the Danes. But peace doesn't last. And King Ethelred the Unready, that means, by the way, ill-advised, unrede, not that he is unprepared, but he's dealing with renewed Viking attacks from new Danes. And I'm afraid he loses on this one, and he starts paying tribute to Denmark. The tribute was known as the Danegeld. And here we have one of the pieces of coin, which was minted in England and sent to Denmark. You may remember that the play Hamlet takes place in Denmark. And there's at one point where they're going to send Hamlet on the ship. The secret plan is to actually have him murdered on the ship, but he manages to wiggle out of it. But what is the excuse for sending Hamlet to England? It is to collect the tribute from the English. So that means the time setting of Hamlet is right around this time of the late 900s, very, very early 1000 or so. So the final group of scholars are all arguing that around the year 1000 is when Beowulf is actually composed. What's the argument for this? Well, there's some Viking loanwords in there that clearly would not have been there earlier. The sole manuscript that we have dates from this time. It's actually now in a West Saxon dialect, but has been clearly revised and rewritten from whatever there was before. But we don't know how far ahead that would have been. But anyway, the manuscript actually dates from about the year 1000. We also have subject matter that might be really appealing to Danes, who are now actually the rulers of the island. So that is actually quite compelling. I personally am of the, it's 900, but I actually do not have a dog in a fight for this. The Beowulf manuscript dates from about 1000. Actually, most of our manuscripts in Old English date from around the year 1000. Vellum manuscripts are fairly fragile. There's been a lot of berserking going on. Things get destroyed, but we do actually have an enormous amount of stuff, most of it dating from the late 900s. We have 400 surviving manuscripts that contain something written in Old English. It might be something as simple as the translation of Cadman's hymn into Old English in the margin of a Latin copy of Bede's Ecclesiastical History. But we also have translations of the Bible, volumes of saints' lives, volumes of sermons, books of theology, scientific and technical treatises of various kinds, simple narratives in prose, which are some being used as school texts clearly, some of them clearly just kind of entertaining reading. We have 4 surviving manuscripts of poetry. These are all collections. And they all date from around the same time as the Beowulf manuscript. A lot of it is Christian poetry, Cadman's hymn, of course, leading the Dream of the Rood, but there's actually huge amounts of religious poetry. There's some heroic poetry, not as much as you think there is, but Beowulf is the big one. And we have collections of riddles, elegies. These elegies about laments of last survivors and exiles are sometimes referred to generically as the wisdom poems. You might see that phrase every now and then in a collection. So we really do have huge amounts of stuff written in Old English. It's just that the poetic stuff, which you tend to privilege in a course on English literature, maybe not quite so much. But what we have is pretty darn good.